I play nerd.
You keep for your collection.
X-Men time. The X-Men are my favorite comic from the 90s, especially around the time Jim Lee did X-Men #1 and around the time that the X-Men animated series came out in 1992. So I try to keep my display more in alignment with how they looked in the 90s, maybe some from the 80s, or maybe a little bit after if their costume is close enough to the 90s version. Starting off on the left, we have Generation X, Excalibur, and some random characters that are from the X-Men comics. So let's first take a look at the leader of Generation X, Sean Cassidy, the Banshee with his screaming face. The other leader of Generation X is Emma Frost, formerly known as the White Queen. This costume is more modern. Most of her costumes kind of look the same, where they show off her midriff and her cleavage. And who fell over there? It's Megan, member of Excalibur. Not sure if she's actually a mutant, but she has shape-shifting abilities. The leader of Excalibur, Captain Brian Braddock himself, who was more or less a Marvel version of Superman. Then we go to Nightcrawler, the teleporting fuzzy elf himself, another member of Excalibur, and one of the most well-loved members of the X-Men. Here, she kind of fell over, probably from phasing too much. Kitty Pryde, aka Shadowcat, aka Sprite, aka Ariel, or as I like to call her sometimes, the original mother of dragons. Over towards the back, we have a member of Generation X, Chamber, whose real name I don't remember. I think it's Jonathan something. And let's see who we got back there. It's Wade Wilson, Deadpool, the man from the movies himself. He was in the New Mutants. He was in X-Force. Once he got popular, he became sort of a member of X-Men. Also in the back, we have one of the first mutants I ever got exposure to because of Spider-Man and his amazing friends from the early 80s. And that's Angelica Jones, Firestar, who I also followed over into New Warriors comics. And from 1970s, the part-time member of the X-Men, the only Asian male X-Men member, and that is Sunfire, whose real name is Hiro Yoshida. And not a member of any X team, but he's kind of an ally, so he popped up in the comics every now and then. And his past is more in alignment with Wolverine's past, and that's David North, also known as Maverick, who was part of the Weapon X program. Moving over to the right side, where we have X-Force and X-Factor. Let's start off with Christopher, Nathan, Charles, Summers, Dayspring, Ascani Sun, whatever other names he has. Cable, the son of Cyclops, and Madeline Pryor, the Goblin Queen. Here he is in his, I'm going to say, mid to late 90s costume, the one that he's more well known for from the video game Marvel vs. Capcom, or Marvel vs. Capcom 2. The leader of X-Factor, the brother of Cyclops, Alex Summers Havoc, who was also one of the earlier members of the X-Men team from the 60s. Started off on the X-Men team, but moved on to X-Factor, then he hops around wherever he wants. Is Forge, the mutant inventor from the Cheyenne Native American tribe. Havoc's girlfriend, also the daughter of Magneto, is Lorna Dane, Polaris with her magnetic abilities, and who has green hair for reasons. Another offspring of Magneto is Pietro Maximoff, the speedster, known as Quicksilver, in his costume that he's pretty much had for most of his existence. Original member of New Mutants, part-time member of the X-Men later on in his career, is Cannonball Samuel Guthrie from Kentucky with his blast effects. And unfortunately, this figure didn't come with any legs. Moving on to one character who has luck powers, and that is Domino of X-Force. Real name is Beatrice something. This figure is actually a more modern costume because I couldn't get her 90s version, but her costumes are pretty much kind of similar throughout the decades. Former member of New Mutants, Tabitha Smith, Boom Boom, Boomer, Meltdown, whatever name you want to go by. Here she is in her classic pink 90s costume, sporting her green sunglasses, blowing a bubble. She's definitely down with the Haktua. The strong guy from X Factor, codenamed Strong Guy, otherwise known as Guido Castellaneta. Here he is, looking very comical. because he always looked kind of really weirdly proportioned. But otherwise, this is pretty much spot on. Great accuracy with this figure. Going to the daughter of one of the X-Men, Teresa O'Rourke, otherwise known as Siren. And for some reason, on this figure, they decided to give her a closed mouth when her mutant power is sonic screams. The strong guy of the X-Force team, former member of the Hellions, James Proudstar, brother of John Proudstar, Thunderbird from the second X-Men team. Here he is, known as Warpath. The last member of X-Force is another former member of the New Mutants, and that's Robert DaCosta, Sunspot. Moving on to some X-Men allies that have hiding here in the back. We have one former member of the X-Men in her 80s costume, Allison Blair, the Dazzler. Following her is another former member of the X-Men from the Mojoverse in his 80s costume. Another character with good luck powers, that is Longshot with his fantastic mutant mullet. Now get on to the X-Men team themselves. Let's go to the gold team. Let's get Jean Grey here. Wife of Cyclops, Scott Summers, one of the most powerful telepaths in the world. Moving on to the leader, the weather goddess herself, Aurora Monroe, Storm in her black costume. And now the first X-Men I had exposure to from the animated series Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends from the 80s is Bobby Drake, otherwise known as Iceman. And the time-traveling mutant from the future, from the XSE, Lucas Bishop, or just called Bishop. This is actually his X-Men 97 version because I couldn't get my hands on a comic-accurate version from the 90s. The man with the wingspan, Warren Worthington III, formerly Angel, now called Archangel as of the 90s. Here he is with his metallic wings, which are also articulated on this figure. And the final member of the X-Men Gold team, the Russian Pyotr Nikolaevich Rasputin, or Peter Rasputin, Colossus. There he is. His figure has a really good non-vac metal silver painting that really displays his organic metal superpowers really well. And on to the X-Men Blue team, starting off the leader, Cyclops, my favorite character, Scott Summers, with his optic blast and his classic Jim Lee costume. And the most popular mutant, of course, Wolverine, aka Logan, aka James Howlett, in his, I'm gonna call this my favorite Wolverine costume. If I were to get another one, it'd be the classic yellow and brown one. Let's get the kid of the group, Jubilation Lee, otherwise known as Jubilee. Here she is in her classic 90s costume with the yellow coat, the jorts, the pink top, and the pink sunglasses. The telepath of the team, Betsy Braddock, Psylocke. Here she is in her early 90s team uniform. I don't have an actual Jim Lee design costume that she had in X-Men #1 and the X-Men 90s comic run. Hank McCoy, Beast. This figure is pretty cool. Looks good. Moving on to the Southern Belle. I believe her name is now Anna Marie, but her name is Rogue as her code name. This is her classic costume. This is definitely 90s. Gives off her 90s vibe. Now let's go on to the Cajun, Remy LeBeau. Her code name, the name's Gambit. Remember it. And the character that was brought into the 90s animated series, Just to Die, originally called Changeling from the 1960s. I believe his real name was Kevin Sidney. It is Morph. And of course, the founder, Professor Charles Francis Xavier, the world's strongest telepath, in his yellow hovering chair. Very 90s. Let's pull him out so you can see his crippled legs. Here he is wearing his tie. And we also take a look at his wheelchair. Down on the lower shelf, I have Hasbro's, I'm going to say 3-inch line of X-Men 97 figures. I've always wanted to have a Sentinel, but when I was a kid, I never had one because they didn't make them, or they're too big or too expensive. So when they released this for the X-Men 97 line, definitely had to have it. Here I have Cyclops shooting his knees with the Sentinel holding Rogue, and Storm and Wolverine attacking from the top. Figures I have separate from my X-Men shelf are the X-Men 97 versions of Cyclops and Jean Grey, Scott Summers, Marvel Girl, whatever you want to call them. definitely one of my favorite couples in comic books, and I want to have them next to some other figures that I have that are not X-Men. And that's going to do it for my collection of X-Men action figures, mainly from the Marvel Legends line. I did a little rearranging as I do from time to time, just to rotate things up, keep it spicy, keep things fresh, and just to because I want to play with them. So that's it. Enough said.